I could hardly believe my ears when my unfaithful wife announced she was spending the weekend with her boss, and that I'd just have to deal with it. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Sophie's boss walked in with a smug grin, announcing that she would be with him whenever he wanted. His voice was dripping with superiority. "And if you try to stop it," he added, "I'll ruin your life." My blood surged with anger as I stared at them both. They had no idea what I was about to unleash. When Sophie arrived at our penthouse that Friday evening, something was off. She carried herself with an unexpected confidence, bordering on arrogance. Tossing her designer handbag onto the marble counter, she met my gaze with a smug look, as if she were in on some secret I didn't know. "Adrian, I'm spending the weekend with my boss, and you'll just have to deal with it," she said, her voice thick with indifference. I blinked, trying to process her words, my grip tightening around the whiskey glass in my hand. "What did you just say?" I asked, my tone deceptively calm. "You heard me," she replied, brushing past me as if I was nothing but an obstacle in her way. "I'm staying at the GR Monarch with Victor. It's not up for discussion. Viktor Ivanov." The name alone hit me like a punch to the gut. He was the CEO of one of London's most powerful financial firms, ruthless, wealthy, and known for his utter disregard for those beneath him. And he was my wife's boss. Before I could react, there was another knock at the door. Sophie casually strolled over and opened it. There he stood, Viktor Ivanov himself, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. He entered like he owned the place, his sharp blue eyes locking onto mine with the look of someone who had never been told no. "She'll be with me whenever I want," he said flatly, his Russian accent adding weight to his words. "And if you try to stop it, I'll ruin your life." Sophie cast me a pitying glance, as if she expected me to crumble under the weight of his threat. I exhaled slowly, trying to mask the fire burning inside me. They had no idea what I was about to do. I had met Sophie back in our university days. She was stunning, golden blonde hair, piercing green eyes, and a charm that could make any man bend at her feet. Together, we built a life. I supported her as she climbed the corporate ladder in finance while I ran my own consulting firm. I gave her everything. Everything she had now thrown away. I watched her climb into Victor's sleek black car, my mind already calculating my next move. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. If Victor thought he could waltz into my home, disrespect me, and strip me of my dignity, he was gravely mistaken. As for Sophie, she had made her choice. Now I was going to make mine. Revenge wasn't about acting on impulse. It was about patience, precision, and striking when they least expected it. While Sophie was occupied with Victor over the weekend, I set my plan into motion. First, I called in a favor from an old friend, James, a top-tier private investigator. Within hours, he handed me a folder filled with Victor's darkest secrets: insider trading, offshore accounts, illegal dealings. Everything I needed to bring him down. Next, I turned my attention to Sophie. She thought she held the upper hand, but she had forgotten one crucial detail. Our finances were deeply intertwined. Our luxurious home was bought in my name. The lavish lifestyle she enjoyed was funded by me, her credit cards, my accounts. By Sunday evening, I had frozen all our shared assets. When Sophie returned that night, her expression was smug until she saw me standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, waiting. She set her purse down, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "What's with the look?" she scoffed. "Still mad?" I took a slow sip, savoring the moment. "You might want to check your bank account." Confusion flickered across her face. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and froze. Her head shot up, panic creeping into her eyes. "What did you do?" she demanded. I leaned forward, a smirk playing on my lips. "I took care of it." She spun around, storming for the door, but before she could leave, the doorbell rang. She hesitated, glancing at me before yanking it open. A courier stood there, holding an envelope. "Sophie Bennett?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice tense. He handed it over and left. Her hands trembled as she tore it open, her breath catching as she looked up at me. Her face went pale. "You're divorcing me?" she whispered, horror in her eyes. "Not just that," I said coolly. "I'm making sure you walk away with nothing." Her face drained of all color. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I already did," I replied. While Sophie was unraveling, I shifted my focus to Victor. On Monday morning, I walked into his office. His assistant stammered, but I didn't give her the chance to stop me. Victor glanced up from his desk, clearly irritated. "You've got a lot of nerve coming here," he said. I set a thick envelope on his desk and leaned in. Read it. He frowned as he opened it, his expression darkening as he flipped through the pages. Evidence of his shady dealings. You've been busy, I said. Illegal trades, money laundering. If the Financial Conduct Authority gets a hold of this, your empire crumbles overnight. His jaw tightened, but he held his composure. What do you want? I smiled. Everything. He narrowed his eyes. Meaning, you resign as CEO publicly within 24 hours. And if you refuse, this evidence goes to the authorities. By the way, I made copies. A long silence stretched between us before he finally exhaled, rubbing his temple. You really thought you could take what's mine and get away with it? He said. I stood tall, meeting his gaze. She's not worth this much trouble. Funny, I said, heading for the door. That's exactly what I thought about you. By the next morning, the headlines were ablaze with Victor's resignation. I sat in my office, watching the news, satisfaction burning in my chest. As for Sophie, she was left with nothing. No money, no power, no way back. This was only the beginning. The moment Victor's resignation hit the headlines, the corporate world descended into chaos. Investors panicked, stock prices plummeted, and financial analysts scrambled to make sense of what had happened. But behind the scenes, I wasn't finished. I knew a man like Victor wouldn't go down quietly. He would fight, claw, and scheme his way back into power. That's why I made sure his fall was complete. Within hours, I leaked the real financial records. The authorities launched a full-scale investigation. The moment they uncovered Victor's offshore accounts and illegal dealings, it was over. By the end of the week, he was arrested. As for Sophie, she had no idea what was coming next. She was still reeling from the divorce papers and frozen accounts. She tried calling me, texting me, even showing up at my office. But I refused to see her. One evening, she managed to catch me as I was leaving work. Adrian, please, she pleaded, blocking my path. Her once pristine appearance was crumbling, her makeup smudged, her expensive clothes now wrinkled. I made a mistake, she said, her voice shaky. I folded my arms, tilting my head. A mistake? You threw away our marriage for a power-hungry fraud, and now that he's gone, you suddenly regret it. Tears welled in her eyes. I never intended to hurt you like this, she said. I scoffed. You never intended to get caught. She reached out to grab my hand, but I stepped back. You don't get to rewrite history, Sophie. You made your choice, and now you'll face the consequences. For the first time, I saw genuine panic in her eyes. But I have nothing left. You froze my accounts, my cards don't work. I can't even pay my rent. I stared at her, feeling no sympathy. That's not my problem. You can't just leave me like this, she shouted, desperation in her voice. I leaned in, my voice low and cutting. Number one, you were my biggest mistake. And then I walked away. She collapsed onto the pavement, sobbing, but I felt nothing. Victor had fallen. Sophie was left in ruins. But there was still one last move to make. In the following days, I met with key executives from Victor's company. With him gone, a power vacuum had emerged and I stepped in. Using my consulting expertise, I positioned myself as the ideal candidate to take over certain parts of the firm. The board, desperate for stability, welcomed my offer. Within weeks, I was running the very company that had once been Victor's empire. I took everything he had. As for Sophie, she was evicted from her luxury apartment, drowning in debt, and blacklisted from every prestigious firm in the city. One evening, she showed up at my office, a last-ditch effort to beg for help. Adrian, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I have nothing left. I leaned back in my chair, watching her carefully. You wanted power, Sophie. You wanted money. You chose him because you thought he was better than me. Tears slid down her cheeks. I was wrong, she said. I gave her a slow, cruel smile. Yes, you were. She swallowed hard. Can we at least be civil? I stood up and walked to the window. Civil? After everything. She hesitated. I don't know where to go or what to do. I turned back to her, my expression unreadable. Not my problem. Her shoulders slumped. It finally hit her. She had lost me for good. As she walked out of my office, I felt a profound sense of closure. I had won. Not just against Victor, not just against Sophie. I had reclaimed my life. And for the first time in years, I was truly free. Months later, as I sat sipping coffee in my penthouse, the same one Sophie had once lived in, I received the news alert. Viktor Ivanov sentenced to 15 years for financial fraud. A smirk crept onto my face. Justice served. As for Sophie, Rumors circulated that she was working as a waitress in a rundown cafe, a shadow of the woman she had once been. As for me, I had rebuilt myself stronger than ever. I had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Revenge wasn't just about settling the score. It was about taking back control. And I had done exactly that. I leaned back, satisfied. They thought they could break me, but in the end, I was the one who broke them.